Most people think a genius is someone born with a special brain. That's comforting, because if genius is genetic, then the rest of us are off the hook. But that idea is wrong. A powerful mind isn't something you're given, it's something you train. And the training has almost nothing to do with memorizing facts. The first rule is this: don't fool yourself. The easiest person to fool is you. We often think we understand something just because we can repeat the words. But repeating isn't understanding. Real understanding means you can rebuild the idea from scratch, using your own thinking. So when you learn something new, stop and ask, can I explain this to a curious 12-year-old without fancy words? If the answer is no, you're not done yet. The second rule, attack the basics. Genius minds don't start with complexity. They start with simple questions. What is really happening? Why does it work this way and not some other way? If you don't understand the foundations, everything built on top of them is shaky. Never be embarrassed to ask basic questions. Embarrassment is the enemy of intelligence. The third rule, play. Serious breakthroughs rarely come from forced thinking. They come when the mind is relaxed, curious, and having fun. Treat ideas like toys. Take them apart. Put them back together the wrong way. See what breaks. A playful mind is a dangerous mind, in the best possible way. Next, connect ideas across fields. A trained mind doesn't live in one box. It steals tools from everywhere: physics, art, music, biology, everyday life. The more connections you build, the more creative your thinking becomes. Nature doesn't divide itself into subjects. Neither should your brain. Another rule most people ignore: get comfortable with not knowing. Saying I don't know isn't weakness, it's honesty. And honesty is where learning starts. The moment you pretend to understand, your growth stops. Curiosity lives only where certainty dies. Finally, remember this: thinking is an active process. You don't train your mind by passively consuming information. You train it by wrestling with ideas, making mistakes, correcting yourself, and trying again. Confusion isn't failure. It's a sign you're actually thinking. So if you want to train your mind like a genius, don't chase intelligence. Chase clarity. Chase curiosity. Chase understanding. And never ever be satisfied with words that sound smart but mean nothing. That's how powerful minds are built. Most people grow up believing that intelligence is something fixed, something you're either born with or you're not. We label people early: smart, average, not academic, and then spend the rest of our lives living inside those labels. This belief is comforting because it removes responsibility. If genius is a gift handed out at birth, then effort doesn't matter much. You either have it or you don't. But this idea collapses the moment you look closely at how great thinkers actually think. A trained mind is not a lucky mind. It is a disciplined, curious, and stubborn mind. What we call genius is usually the result of long periods of struggling with ideas, failing to understand them, and refusing to walk away until clarity appears. The difference between an ordinary thinker and an extraordinary one is not raw intelligence, but patience. Genius is the willingness to stay with confusion longer than most people are comfortable with. Training the mind begins with changing how you relate to learning. Instead of asking, how fast can I get this? You ask, how deeply can I understand this? Speed impresses people, but depth changes the way you think. A trained mind does not rush to conclusions. It slows down, breaks ideas apart, and examines each piece carefully. This process is uncomfortable because it exposes gaps in understanding, but those gaps are not failures. They are opportunities to strengthen the mind. Another critical part of training. The mind is abandoning the fear of being wrong. Many people avoid difficult ideas because they don't want to look foolish. But intelligence grows only where mistakes are allowed. A trained mind expects to be wrong at first. It tests ideas, finds errors, adjusts, and tests again. Each mistake sharpens thinking, like friction sharpening a blade. Without that friction, the mind stays dull. Training also means actively engaging with ideas rather than passively accepting them. Reading, listening, or watching is not enough. A trained mind constantly asks questions. Why does this work? What assumption is being made here? What would happen if this condition changed? By interrogating ideas instead of memorizing them, the mind becomes flexible and powerful. Information turns into understanding, and understanding turns into insight. Another illusion about genius is that it belongs only to rare, exceptional people. In reality, anyone who is willing to think carefully, honestly, and persistently can train their mind to operate at a higher level. The process is not glamorous. It involves repetition, frustration, and moments of doubt. But over time, something remarkable happens. The mind becomes more confident, not because it knows everything, but because it knows how to figure things out. A trained mind also learns to value clarity over complexity. Many people confuse complicated language with deep thinking, but true intelligence seeks simplicity, not because ideas are simple, but because clarity reveals what truly matters. When you train your mind, you learn to strip ideas down to their essentials. You stop hiding behind impressive words and start dealing with reality directly. In the end, genius is not a destination, it is a habit. It is the habit of questioning, of refusing shallow understanding, of staying curious, even when answers are hard to find. When you train your mind this way, intelligence stops being something you admire in others and becomes something you actively build within yourself, one thought at a time. Most people confuse learning with collecting information. They memorize definitions, repeat formulas, and recognize familiar phrases, and they call that understanding. But memorization is fragile. The moment the context changes, the knowledge falls apart. Real understanding is different. It is solid, flexible, and alive. It allows you to adapt ideas to new situations instead of freezing when something looks unfamiliar. True understanding begins when you stop accepting words as substitutes for meaning. It is easy to say something, makes sense because it sounds logical. It is much harder to explain it clearly in your own language without leaning on technical terms or borrowed phrases. When you can do that, you are no longer repeating knowledge, you are recreating it. That act of reconstruction is where the mind grows stronger. A trained mind constantly checks itself for illusions of understanding. When an idea feels obvious, that is exactly the moment to slow down. Ask yourself what is really going on underneath the surface. Can you describe the process step by step? Can you explain not just what happens, but why it must happen that way? If you remove one part, does the idea still hold together? These questions expose weak spots that memorization hides. Real understanding also means being able to transfer ideas across situations. If you truly understand something, you can recognize its structure even when it appears in a different form. A memorized answer works only in the environment it was learned in. An understood idea travels with you. It adapts. It becomes a tool instead of a fact. That is the difference between knowing something and owning it. One of the greatest obstacles to understanding is the fear of sounding simple. Many people avoid plain explanations because they think simplicity makes them look less intelligent. In reality, the opposite is true. Complexity often hides confusion. Clarity exposes understanding. When you force yourself to explain an idea in simple terms, you quickly discover whether you truly grasp it or not. If you stumble, that stumble is valuable information. It tells you exactly where to focus your thinking. Another overlooked aspect of understanding is time. Deep understanding cannot be rushed. The mind needs space to wrestle with ideas, to let them clash with existing beliefs, and to slowly settle into something coherent. This process feels inefficient, especially in a world obsessed with speed. But speed without understanding creates confidence without competence. A trained mind is willing to slow down because it knows that depth saves time in the long run. Understanding also requires honesty. You must be willing to admit when something does not make sense, even if others seem to understand it effortlessly. Pretending to understand is the fastest way to stop learning. Admitting confusion keeps the mind open and curious. It creates a gap that the mind naturally wants to fill with real insight. When understanding replaces memorization, learning becomes creative instead of mechanical. Ideas stop being static and start interacting with each other. You begin to see patterns, connections, and underlying principles. Knowledge becomes lighter to carry because it is organized by meaning, not by memory alone. In the end, real understanding is not about sounding smart or passing tests. It is about building a mental framework that can grow, adapt, and withstand pressure. When you prioritize understanding over memorization, you train your mind to think, not just recall. And that ability to think clearly and independently is far more powerful than any collection of facts. Most people believe intelligence looks serious. They imagine deep thought as something tense, rigid, and heavy, as if important ideas only arrive through struggle and pressure. But some of the most powerful thinking happens in moments of play. A playful mind is not careless or shallow. It is relaxed, curious, and willing to explore without demanding immediate results. This mental freedom creates space for ideas to grow in unexpected directions. Play is essential because it removes fear from thinking. When you treat ideas like toys rather than tests, you stop worrying about being wrong. You experiment more freely. You twist concepts, exaggerate them, combine them, and even break them on purpose. In doing so, you discover their limits and hidden structure. Many breakthroughs come not from trying to be correct, but from being curious enough to explore what happens when you aren't. A playful approach allows the mind to wander productively. While focused effort is important, constant pressure can trap thinking in narrow paths. Play opens those paths. It invites the mind to ask strange questions, to imagine impossible scenarios, and to consider alternatives that would otherwise seem ridiculous. These questions often lead to insights that serious goal-driven thinking would never reach. Play also strengthens understanding. When you play with an idea, you are forced to interact with it from multiple angles. You don't just accept it as it is presented. You poke at it, simplify it, reverse it, and reassemble it in new ways. This process deepens comprehension because it reveals what is essential and what is merely decoration. What survives playful stress is what truly matters. Another advantage of play is that it sustains curiosity. Curiosity fades quickly when learning feels like obligation. Play keeps curiosity alive by making thinking enjoyable. When the mind is engaged through interest rather than pressure, it naturally spends more time exploring ideas. That extra time compounds into deeper understanding and stronger intuition. Learning stops feeling like work and starts feeling like discovery. Playfulness also encourages creativity across boundaries. A playful mind is more willing to borrow ideas from unrelated fields and experiment with unusual combinations. It sees patterns where others see separation. This kind of cross-connection is a hallmark of creative intelligence. It allows ideas from art, science, music, and everyday life to inform one another, producing insights that feel original because they are built from unexpected connections. Importantly, play does not mean lack of discipline. It works best when paired with a solid foundation of fundamentals. Once the basics are understood, play becomes a powerful tool for exploration. It tests the strength of knowledge and reveals gaps that serious study might overlook. In this way, play and rigor are not opposites. They are partners. Many people abandon play as they grow older, believing it is unproductive or childish. But losing play is losing one of the mind's most effective learning strategies. Without play, thinking becomes rigid. Ideas harden into rules instead of tools. A trained mind resists this rigidity by deliberately preserving a sense of experimentation and wonder. When you allow yourself to play with ideas, failure stops being discouraging. It becomes feedback. Each wrong turn teaches something useful. This attitude builds resilience and confidence because the mind learns that mistakes are part of the process, not a verdict on intelligence. In the end, play is not a distraction from serious thinking. It is one of its deepest sources. A mind that plays stays flexible, curious, and alive. By making room for experimentation and enjoyment, you train your mind to explore more deeply, think more creatively, and discover insights that disciplined effort alone could never produce. Most people are taught to think inside neat boundaries. One subject for one class, one skill for one job, one way of thinking for one problem. This approach feels organized, but it quietly limits the mind. The reality does not work in separate compartments, and neither do the most powerful ideas. A trained mind learns to move freely across fields, borrowing tools, patterns, and ways of thinking wherever they are useful. Creative thinking often begins when ideas from different areas collide. When you understand only one domain, your thinking follows familiar paths. But when you expose your mind to multiple disciplines, those paths intersect. Patterns from one field suddenly explain problems in another. An idea learned in art can clarify a concept in science. A principle from biology can inspire a solution in engineering. These connections are not accidents. They are the natural result of a mind trained to look beyond labels, cross-disciplinary. Thinking strengthens understanding because it reveals underlying principles. Different fields often describe the same patterns using different languages. When you recognize those shared structures, your understanding deepens. You stop memorizing isolated facts and start seeing systems. This shift changes how you approach problems. Instead of asking which rule applies, you ask which pattern is at work. Another benefit of connecting ideas across fields is flexibility. When one approach fails, a trained mind can switch perspectives. It is not trapped by a single method of thinking. This adaptability is crucial in complex situations where no single discipline offers a complete answer. By drawing from multiple sources, the mind becomes more resilient and inventive. Cross-disciplinary thinking also reduces the fear of unfamiliar problems. When you recognize that many challenges share common structures, new situations feel less intimidating. You may not know the details, but you understand how to explore them. You know how to ask questions, build models, and test assumptions. This confidence comes not from expertise in one area, but from fluency in thinking itself. Exposure to different fields also sharpens creativity by challenging assumptions. Every discipline has its habits and blind spots. When you study only one, those blind spots become invisible. But when you step into another field, you see alternative ways of framing problems. These contrasts force the mind to question what it previously took for granted. In doing so, thinking becomes more precise and less dogmatic. Importantly, cross-disciplinary thinking does not mean knowing everything. It means knowing enough to make meaningful connections. Depth still matters. Without a solid understanding of fundamentals, connections become shallow analogies. A trained mind balances depth with breadth, building strong foundations while remaining open to insights from elsewhere. This way of thinking also encourages lifelong learning. When curiosity extends beyond a single domain, learning never feels finished. Each new field becomes an opportunity to refine how you think, not just what you know. The mind stays active and engaged, continually expanding its range. In practical terms, connecting ideas across fields improves problem solving. Complex problems rarely announce which discipline they belong to. They require synthesis. A trained mind approaches them by assembling perspectives, testing ideas from different angles, and refining solutions through comparison. This process produces answers that are more robust and more original. Ultimately, the ability to connect ideas across fields transforms knowledge into wisdom. Facts gain meaning through context. Skills gain power through combination. When the mind learns to move freely between domains, thinking becomes richer, more creative, and more effective. This is not just an intellectual advantage. It is a way of seeing the world more clearly and responding to it with greater insight. One of the most powerful habits a mind can develop is the ability to say, without hesitation or embarrassment, "I don't know." For many people, those words feel dangerous. They sound like failure, weakness, or ignorance. From a young age, we are trained to hide uncertainty, to give confident answers even when we are unsure, and to treat not knowing as something to be avoided. But this habit quietly damages thinking. A mind that refuses to admit ignorance cannot learn honestly. Intellectual growth begins exactly where certainty ends. The moment you admit you don't know something, you create space for curiosity. That space is essential. Without it, the mind fills gaps with assumptions, borrowed opinions, or half-understood explanations. These substitutes feel comfortable, but they block real understanding. Saying "I don't know" clears the fog and lets the mind see the problem as it actually is. There is a special kind of honesty required for this. It is not just about admitting ignorance to others, but to yourself. Many people convince themselves they understand something when they don't. They recognize familiar words, nod along, and move on. This creates an illusion of knowledge that is far more dangerous than ignorance itself. When you admit, "I don't know," you break that illusion. You stop pretending and start investigating. Embracing uncertainty also changes how you approach questions. Instead of hunting for quick answers, you begin asking better questions. You become more precise about what you don't understand. Is it the definition, the mechanism, the assumption, or the implication? This precision sharpens thinking. The mind stops being vague and starts working with clear targets. Another benefit of accepting "I don't know" is resilience. When you no longer tie your self-worth to always being right, mistakes lose their emotional weight. Being wrong becomes informative rather than humiliating. Each error points directly towards something worth learning. This mindset allows you to explore difficult ideas without fear, which is essential for deep thinking. Uncertainty also keeps the mind flexible. Certainty can harden into dogma. When people believe they already know, they stop listening. A trained mind resists this rigidity. It treats knowledge as provisional, always open to revision. This doesn't mean doubting everything blindly. It means holding ideas lightly enough to adjust them when evidence demands it. That flexibility is a core strength of intelligent thinking. Admitting you don't know also improves communication. It invites dialogue rather than debate. Instead of defending a position at all costs, you explore ideas collaboratively. This openness leads to clearer explanations, stronger reasoning, and better outcomes. It shifts conversations from performances of confidence to shared investigations of truth. Importantly, embracing "I don't know" does not mean accepting ignorance passively. It is not resignation, it is a starting point. Once you admit uncertainty, the natural next step is curiosity. The mind wants to fill the gap, but now it does so deliberately and honestly. Learning becomes purposeful instead of defensive. Over time, this habit builds quiet confidence, not the fragile confidence of someone who must always appear knowledgeable, but the solid confidence of someone who trusts their ability to figure things out. You stop fearing unknowns because you know how to approach them. You know how to ask questions, test ideas, and refine understanding. In the end, the phrase "I don't know" is not a limitation. It is an invitation. It invites exploration, learning, and growth. A mind that welcomes uncertainty stays curious, adaptable, and alive. By embracing not knowing, you give yourself permission to truly understand. And that permission is one of the most powerful tools a thinker can have. Thinking is often treated as a passive activity. People assume that understanding will arrive simply by listening, reading, or watching. Information flows in, and somehow the mind is expected to transform it into insight on its own. But real thinking does not work that way. It is an active process, demanding effort, attention, and engagement. A trained mind does not wait for ideas to settle. It wrestles with them until they make sense. Active thinking begins with resistance. Instead of accepting an idea at face value, the mind pushes back. It asks whether the claim is reasonable, what assumptions support it, and where it might fail. This resistance is not skepticism for its own sake. It is a way of testing strength. Just as muscles grow by working against weight, understanding grows by working against uncertainty. Mistakes play a central role in this process. When thinking is active, errors are unavoidable. But these errors are not signs of failure. They are signals. Each mistake reveals a gap in understanding or a flawed assumption. A passive learner tries to avoid mistakes. An active thinker expects them and uses them as guides. By correcting errors, the mind refines its models of reality and becomes more accurate over time. Active thinking also requires reconstruction. Instead of storing information as finished products, a trained mind breaks ideas apart and rebuilds them. It traces arguments back to their foundations, examines each step, and then assembles them again in its own way. This reconstruction transforms information into understanding. What you rebuild, you own. Another key element is effortful recall. Passive review feels productive because it is easy and familiar. Active recall is harder. It forces the mind to retrieve ideas without prompts, revealing what is truly understood and what is fragile. This struggle strengthens memory and clarity. It turns learning into a skill rather than a habit. Active thinking also thrives on iteration. Understanding rarely arrives fully formed. It improves through cycles of attempt, failure, adjustment, and retry. Each cycle sharpens insight. This iterative process requires patience and humility. The mind must accept that confusion is part of thinking, not a sign of inadequacy. Questions are the engine of active thought. A trained mind generates its own questions instead of waiting for them to be provided. It asks how an idea works, why it matters, and what would happen under different conditions. These questions push thinking forward and prevent stagnation. Without them, learning becomes shallow and mechanical. Active thinking demands attention. Distraction weakens understanding by fragmenting focus. Deep thought requires sustained engagement, enough time for ideas to unfold and interact. This focus allows patterns to emerge and connections to form. It is in these moments of concentrated effort that insight often appears. Over time, active thinking builds intellectual independence. You stop relying on authority or repetition as guarantees of truth. You trust your ability to reason, test, and verify. This independence does not make you inflexible, it makes you adaptable. You can evaluate new ideas without fear because you know how to think them through. In the end, thinking is not something that happens to you, it is something you do. A trained mind takes responsibility for understanding, embraces struggle, and engages fully with ideas. Through active effort, mistakes, and persistence, thinking becomes sharper, deeper, and more reliable. That is how the mind grows. Not by absorbing information, but by working with it.